He hugged a crying bride at the altar, took her home, and she became a mother to his motherless son. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. How are you, my precious and beautiful people? I thank God for your lives every single day. Your presence here is not just support, it's love, it's connection, and it's family. Let me say a quick prayer for you. May peace fill your heart, may joy never leave your home, and may you always feel how deeply loved you are. My family, are you still enjoying this journey with me? I truly want to know. Your words mean everything to me, but I've also noticed something. The likes aren't flowing like they were just 2 days ago. My beautiful people, it takes only 2 seconds to like, just 2 seconds to show love, and it goes a long way. Tell me, how many times have you joined this family? I want to hear from you. Now let's sit back and step into a beautiful new story together. Larissa Jackson stood frozen at the altar, her custom-designed gown cascading around her like a waterfall of broken promises. The cathedral's stained glass cast kaleidoscope patterns across the intricate beadwork on her bodice, each colored fragment seeming to mock the shattered pieces of what should have been her perfect day. A hushed, terrible silence had fallen over the 300 guests who moments before had been smiling in anticipation. Now they sat witness to her greatest humiliation, their collective shock a palpable force pressing against her from all sides. The church was silent, except for her stifled sobs and the uncomfortable shuffling of feet against marble floors. Xavier, her fiancé of 4 years, had left her with nothing but a hastily scribbled note delivered by his best man just moments before the ceremony was to begin. His best man, Jordan, couldn't even meet her eyes as he handed her the folded paper, his own face ashen with embarrassment and pity. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." 5 words, 5 simple words that shattered the beautiful future she had spent years envisioning and months meticulously planning. The $75,000 wedding, with its hand-calligraphed invitations and imported peonies, the 3-week honeymoon to Bali she'd researched for months, the craftsman bungalow they had just put a down payment on in Lincoln Park, all of it dissolved in an instant, leaving her adrift in a sea of white tulle and broken dreams. She could feel the weight of all those eyes upon her. Family members who had flown in from across the country, colleagues who had taken time off work, childhood friends who had stood by her side through every previous heartbreak. Their expressions ranged from shocked disbelief to uncomfortable pity, and Larissa felt herself shrinking under their gaze, wishing the polished floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Oh, honey," her mother whispered, rushing forward from the front pew. But Larissa gently pushed her away, unable to bear comfort that would only confirm the reality of what was happening. She didn't want solutions or reassurances. She wanted to rewind time, to understand where everything had gone so terribly wrong. Through her tear-blurred vision, Larissa noticed a tall figure approaching her from the back of the church. He moved with a deliberate confidence, parting the paralyzed crowd like a ship cutting through still waters. He wasn't part of the wedding party. In fact, she had only met him once before, Stephen Amell, the owner of Moonlight Vineyard, where they had planned to hold their reception. He had come to witness the ceremony before heading to the venue to ensure everything was perfect for their arrival. Instead, he found a devastated bride, abandoned before she could even say, "I do." "Ms. Jackson," he said softly, his voice deep and steady, his eyes a striking shade of blue that reminded her of summer skies, held genuine concern rather than the pity she'd seen reflected in everyone else's. "May I help you somewhere private?" There was something about his voice, calm, assured, without judgment, that cut through her panic like a lighthouse beam through fog. Here was someone who saw her not as a victim to be pitied, but as a person in need of practical assistance. Larissa nodded numbly, grateful for the lifeline he offered. Before she knew what was happening, Stephen had removed his charcoal suit jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, the wool still warm from his body, smelling faintly of cedar and something uniquely masculine. The weight of it was comforting as he guided her through a side door, away from the pitying stares and whispered comments of her guests. His hand at the small of her back was firm but respectful, steadying her when her knees threatened to buckle. Beneath the weight of her humiliation, the cool spring air hit her face as they stepped outside, bringing with it the scent of cherry blossoms and a moment of clarity. She had just been abandoned at the altar. Her life as she knew it was over. The future she had planned, the identity she had begun to build as Xavier's wife, had vanished in an instant. "My car is outside," Stephen said, still with that same calm, a voice that somehow made the chaos around her seem manageable. "I can take you wherever you need to go." Larissa looked up at him, this tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes who was offering her an escape route when everyone else seemed frozen in place. In the harsh sunlight, she noticed details she'd missed during their brief business meeting 3 months ago. The slight crinkle around his eyes that suggested frequent smiling, the touch of silver at his temples that lent him a distinguished air despite his relatively young age, the wedding band tan line on his left hand that had faded but not disappeared. "I have nowhere to go," Larissa whispered, her voice breaking on the last word as a fresh wave of reality crashed over her. "Our apartment is filled with wedding gifts and his things. My family is here from Chicago. The hotel rooms are full of his family. I can't—" She stopped, overwhelmed by the logistics of her heartbreak. Stephen hesitated for only a moment, his eyes assessing her with a thoughtfulness that suggested he was weighing options rather than judging her situation. "Then I'll take you to my home," he finally said, the decision made. "Just until you figure things out." Under normal circumstances, Larissa would never have accepted such an offer from a near stranger. She had always been cautious, practical, the responsible friend who carried extra band-aids and knew the fastest route to the emergency room. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something about Stephen's calm, steady presence made her feel safe when everything else was falling apart. He led her to a sleek black Range Rover, parked discreetly at the side of the church, away from the main entrance, where guests would eventually emerge. Opening the passenger door, he helped her arrange her voluminous dress inside, carefully gathering the layers of tulle and lace with a surprising gentleness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude for this small act of kindness. As they drove away from the church, Larissa stared out the window, her elaborate updo coming undone, black mascara streaking her cheeks. The makeup artist had spent 90 minutes that morning creating a look that would be timeless in the photographs. Now those photographs would never exist, except perhaps in her nightmares. She didn't notice the way Stephen glanced at her periodically, with a mixture of compassion and admiration for her quiet dignity in the face of such humiliation. Nor did she notice how he carefully avoided the main roads, taking a more scenic route that would spare her the possibility of being seen by wedding guests returning to their hotels. The city streets gave way to country roads, and Larissa watched as urban landscapes transformed into rolling hills covered with neat rows of grapevines. The sight was soothing somehow, the orderly patterns a contrast to her chaotic emotions. She hadn't realized how far outside the city Moonlight Vineyard actually was, at least 30 minutes from downtown, nestled in a valley that seemed to exist in a different world entirely. "I have a son," Stephen said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "He's 5. His name is Noah." The unexpected revelation jolted Larissa from her spiral of self-pity. She turned to look at him, momentarily distracted from her own pain by this glimpse into his life. "Where is he now?" "With my sister. She watches him when I have business to attend to." Stephen's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the knuckles whitening slightly before relaxing again. His mother died when he was born. A jolt of empathy cut through Larissa's grief. Here was real tragedy, real loss, not the broken heart and wounded pride she was nursing, but the permanent absence of a beloved partner, a child who would never know his mother. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it deeply. "Cancer," Stephen elaborated, his voice tight with old pain that had scarred but never fully healed. She was diagnosed in her second trimester. She refused treatment to protect Noah. The weight of this revelation hung between them, both touched by profound loss in different ways, both understanding that life rarely follows the paths we carefully plan for it. "My mother died when I was 12, Larissa offered quietly, surprising herself. She hadn't spoken about her mother's death to anyone in years, not even Xavier. It was a wound she kept private, protected. Car accident. It was just me and my dad after that. Stephen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Loss shapes us. Sometimes it breaks us. Sometimes it makes us stronger. And sometimes it just leaves us alone at the altar, Larissa said with unexpected bitterness, immediately regretting the self-pitying tone. Stephen glanced at her, his gaze direct but not unkind. "What he did says nothing about your worth and everything about his character." The simplicity and certainty of this statement pierced something in Larissa's chest. Since getting Xavier's note, she had been wondering what she had done wrong, what flaw in her had driven him away. Stephen's words were the first to suggest that the failure wasn't hers, and they resonated with a truth she wasn't quite ready to accept but desperately needed to hear. As they pulled up to a charming farmhouse surrounded by vineyards bathed in golden sunset light, Larissa felt something unexpected stir within her. Not happiness, it was too soon for that, but perhaps the faintest glimmer of sanctuary in the midst of her storm. A temporary haven where she might catch her breath before facing the wreckage of her carefully planned life. The house was a classic Victorian, painted a soft blue with white trim and a wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of flowers. Grapevines stretched in every direction, climbing trellises and disappearing over gentle hills, the setting sun casting them in shades of gold and amber. It looked like something from a painting or a storybook, far removed from the sleek, modern aesthetic of the Chicago apartment she had shared with Xavier. "It's beautiful," Larissa whispered, the first genuine word she'd spoken since the church. "It's not much," Stephen said as he opened her car door. "But there's a spare room where you can stay for as long as you need." As he helped her from the car, her legs stiff from the drive and the emotional exhaustion, his hand brushed against hers. Warm, strong, steadying. For a brief moment, she leaned into that touch, grateful for the simple human connection when she felt so utterly alone. "Thank you," Larissa whispered, meaning it more than she could express. "For everything." As she followed him inside, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the vineyard, neither of them knew that this act of kindness was the beginning of a journey that would heal them both in ways they never thought possible. That sometimes the end of one dream is merely the prelude to another, more beautiful one. That sometimes fate intervenes in the most unexpected ways, leading us not where we planned to go, but exactly where we need to be. Chapter 2. Sanctuary. Among the vines, morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains, casting dappled patterns across Larissa's face. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then reality crashed back with brutal clarity, and she buried her face in the pillow to muffle a fresh wave of sobs. Her wedding day, the day that was supposed to be the happiest of her life, had become her greatest humiliation. How had she not seen it coming? Were there signs she had ignored? The late nights at the architecture firm, the sudden password on his phone, the way Xavier had begun to pull away physically months ago, all clues she had attributed to pre-wedding stress. Soft knock on the door pulled her back to the present. "Larissa, I've made breakfast if you're hungry." Stephen's voice was gentle, with no hint of the awkwardness she might have expected from a man who had a stranger in wedding lingerie sleeping in his guest room. She sat up, wiping her eyes. She was still wearing the silk slip from beneath her wedding dress, having been too emotionally exhausted to think about clothes the night before. "I'll be right out," she called, her voice raspy from crying. "Just give me a few minutes." "Take your time. We'll be in the kitchen when you're ready." She found a soft cotton robe hanging on the back of the door, simple navy blue, clearly masculine but clean and comforting. She wrapped it around herself, drowning in its size, but grateful for the coverage. In the adjoining bathroom, she winced at her reflection, mascara-stained cheeks, swollen eyes, the intricate braids of her wedding hairstyle now a tangled mess. Atop her head, using the supplies Stephen had thoughtfully laid out, a new toothbrush, toothpaste, face wash. She did her best to make herself presentable. She worked patiently to undo her elaborate hairstyle, releasing her natural curls to fall around her shoulders. Without makeup, with her hair free, wearing a too large robe, she looked nothing like the bride who had stood in the church yesterday. Perhaps that was a blessing. The kitchen was bright and homey, with sunlight streaming through large windows overlooking the vineyard. A small boy with curly brown hair sat at the table, swinging his legs and eyeing her curiously. He had his father's eyes, but softer features, a button nose, rounded cheeks still holding traces of baby fat. "Are you a princess?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy said you were wearing a magic dress yesterday." Despite everything, Larissa felt a small smile tug at her lips. "No, sweetie, I'm not a princess. My name is Larissa." "I'm Noah," he announced proudly. "I'm 5 3/4. Do you like pancakes? Daddy made blueberry ones. They're my favorite." Larissa glanced at Stephen, who was standing by the stove, spatula in hand, a faint flush on his cheeks. "I told him you were a friend who needed a place to stay," he explained quietly, "and that you had been at a very fancy party in a beautiful dress." Gratitude washed over her at his discretion. The last thing she needed was to explain her heartbreak to a 5-year-old. "I love blueberry pancakes," she told Noah, sliding in to see the chair across from him. "They're my favorite too." Stephen placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of her, prepared exactly as she liked it, with a dash of cream but no sugar. At her surprised look, he shrugged. "I noticed how you took it during our meeting about the reception. Something about this small act of observation and thoughtfulness made Larissa's throat tighten. Xavier, despite 4 years together, still routinely forgot that she didn't take sugar. "Thank you," she murmured, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Stephen served the pancakes, perfect golden discs studded with juicy blueberries, and joined them at the table. Noah immediately launched into a detailed explanation of his kindergarten class's tadpole project, seemingly unfazed by the stranger at his breakfast table. As Noah chattered happily, Larissa found herself studying Stephen in the morning light. He was handsome in a rugged, understated way, strong jawline, broad shoulders, laugh lines around his eyes. His hands, as he cut Noah's pancakes into bite-sized pieces, were large, but gentle, capable. There was a quiet confidence about him, a steadiness that was both intimidating and comforting. "Miss Larissa, do you know about frogs?" Noah asked suddenly, pulling her from her observations. "Some things," she answered with a smile. "I know they start as eggs, then become tadpoles, then froglets, then frogs." Noah's eyes widened. "That's right. Our class has tadpoles and they're growing legs now. They're froglets. Do you want to see my drawings of them?" Before she could answer, he had scrambled down from his chair and was racing toward what she presumed was his bedroom. "I'm sorry," Stephen said once Noah was out of earshot. "He doesn't get many visitors his age. My sister brings her kids sometimes, but—" "Don't apologize," Larissa interrupted. "He's wonderful, and the distraction is nice." Stephen studied, her face for a moment. "How are you really doing?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than morbid curiosity, broke through her carefully maintained composure. Tears welled in her eyes again. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm underwater, like none of this is real. I keep thinking I'll wake up and it will be yesterday morning and I'll be getting my makeup and done with my bridesmaids and everything will be fine." Stephen reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. The touch was brief but anchoring. "It's going to hurt for a while. There's no way around that. But you will get through this." "How do you know?" she asked, not challenging but genuinely wondering. "Because 4 years ago, I thought I would die from grief when Sarah passed. I couldn't imagine a future without her." His gaze drifted to the window, to the vineyard beyond. But days passed, then months. I focused on Noah, on the vineyard, and slowly I built a new life, different than the one I had planned, but still good. He turned back to her, his gaze meeting hers with quiet intensity. "You're stronger than you think, Larissa Jackson, and you'll build a new life too." Before she could respond, Noah came bounding back into the kitchen, arms full of colorful drawings. The moment broke, but Stephen's words lingered, a small flame of hope in the darkness of her despair. After breakfast, Stephen showed her to a small office where she could make any calls she needed. "Take all the time you need," he said. "Noah and I will be working in the vineyard if you need anything." Left alone, Larissa stared at her phone, which had been buzzing constantly since yesterday. 57 missed calls, over 100 text messages, most from family and friends, but several from Xavier as well. Taking a deep breath, she called her father first. The conversation was difficult, explaining where she was, assuring him she was safe, agreeing that they would handle cancelling the honeymoon and returning gifts. She convinced him not to drive out to the vineyard immediately, promising to come home in a few days when things had settled. Her bridesmaids were next, a teary conference call that oscillated between supportive outrage on her behalf and practical questions about returning dresses and accessories. But it was the final call that Larissa dreaded most. With trembling fingers, she dialed Xavier's number. "Larissa, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay?" His voice was frantic, tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. It made her anger flare. "Am I okay?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You left me at the altar in front of everyone we know, with nothing but a 5-word note, and you're asking if I'm okay." I know. I'm so sorry. I panicked. I couldn't go through with it." "Why, Xavier? What changed between our rehearsal dinner and the ceremony? What suddenly made you unable to marry me after 4 years together?" There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of his breathing. "I've been seeing someone," he finally admitted. "For a few months. I thought it was just a fling, that I could end it before the wedding, but yesterday morning she told me she's pregnant." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Larissa gripped the desk to steady herself. "You're having a child with another woman. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you, but then the wedding plans were moving so fast, and I didn't know how to stop it without hurting you." Larissa laughed bitterly. "So instead, you chose to humiliate me in the cruelest way possible? That was your solution, to not hurting me? I know it was cowardly. I'm so sorry, Larissa. I still care about you. If there's anything I can do..." "There's nothing you can do, Xavier. Nothing except stay away from me." She took a deep breath, surprised by the sudden clarity she felt. "I hope you and your new family will be very happy together." She ended the call before he could respond, set down the phone and walked to the window. Outside, she could see Stephen and Noah working among the vines, the little boy mimicking his father's movements with serious concentration. The sight brought an unexpected calm to her churning emotions. Xavier was having a child with another woman. The future she had planned was irretrievable, gone forever. And yet, watching father and son work together under the spring sunshine, Larissa felt the first tentative stirrings of something she had thought impossible just moments ago. The sense that perhaps, someday, she might find a new future worth living for. Days at the vineyard turned into a week, and Larissa found herself settling into an unexpected routine. Mornings were spent helping Stephen with light work among the vines, afternoons playing with Noah or exploring the surrounding countryside, and evenings sharing quiet conversations. On the porch as the sun set over the rolling hills, she had called her design firm in Chicago and arranged to work remotely for a few weeks, grateful for the distraction of deadlines and client feedback. Her apartment, which held too many memories of Xavier, was being packed up by her father and sister. A small suitcase of clothes and essentials had been delivered, allowing her to finally change out of borrowed items. On her 8th day at Moonlight Vineyard, Larissa was kneeling between rows of grapevines, carefully removing weeds from around the base of the plants. Stephen had shown her how to distinguish the unwanted growth from the beneficial cover crops, and she found the repetitive, careful work soothing. "You have a natural touch with the vines," Stephen commented, coming up behind her with a tray holding 2 glasses of water. The spring sun was warm, and they had been working since early morning. Larissa accepted the water gratefully. "I find it therapeutic, actually. There's something satisfying about clearing away what doesn't belong, making space for growth." She paused, realizing the metaphor in her own words. "I guess that applies to more than just gardening." Stephen settled beside her, his long legs stretched out between the rows. "The vineyard has always been healing ground for me," he agreed. "After Sarah died, working the land kept me sane. It's honest work. You put in effort and the vines reward you. People aren't always so reliable." Larissa's hands stilled on the vine she was tending. Over the past week, they had shared meals, worked side by side, even watched movies with Noah after his bedtime, but neither had spoken much about their past losses. "Can I ask what happened? With your wife?" The question was gentle, giving him space to decline. Stephen was quiet for a long moment. His gaze drifted to the distant hills, seeing something beyond the present moment. "Sarah was a photographer," he finally said, his voice low and measured. "Wildlife, primarily. We met when she came to the vineyard for a spread in Wine Country magazine. She was brilliant, passionate. Her photos captured life in ways that took your breath away." He smiled faintly at the memory. "We were only together for 2 years before she got pregnant with Noah. She was so excited, already planning how she'd document every moment of his childhood." Stephen's hands, strong and capable, fidgeted with a vine tendril. "She started having headaches during her first trimester. We thought it was just pregnancy symptoms, but when they got worse, she finally saw a specialist." His voice grew tighter. "Stage 4 glioblastoma, brain cancer. They gave her 6 months without treatment, maybe a year with aggressive intervention." Larissa's heart ached for him. "That's devastating." The doctors advised terminating the pregnancy to start treatment immediately. But Sarah refused. She said, his voice broke slightly. She said that even if she couldn't be saved, she could give Noah a chance at life. He looked down at his hands, soil embedded in the creases of his palms. She made it through the pregnancy, held on long enough to see him once, to name him. She died 3 days after he was born. Without thinking, Larissa reached out and took his hand, her dark fingers intertwining with his pale ones. "I'm so sorry, Stephen." He squeezed her hand gently, the connection between them strengthening. "For the first year, I was just functioning on autopilot, taking care of a newborn, running the vineyard, grieving my wife. I don't remember much of that time, to be honest. It's all a blur of sleepless nights and endless days." "But you made it through," Larissa said softly. "We did. Noah and I. The vineyard almost failed that year. I was too distracted, too broken to give it the attention it needed. But somehow, the vines survived. They're resilient that way." He looked at her meaningfully. "Like people can be." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, still holding hands, the connection feeling natural rather than forced. "What about you?" Stephen asked eventually. "If you don't mind me asking, why did he leave?" Larissa took a deep breath. It still hurt to think about, but not as sharply as before. The betrayal felt more like a dull ache now rather than the searing pain of that first day. Xavier and I met in grad school. He was studying architecture. I was in graphic design. We had this whole life planned. Marriage, careers, children, the perfect urban existence. She laughed softly at her own naivety. "I thought we wanted the same things." She pulled her hand away gently to twist one of her curls, a nervous habit. "He's been seeing someone else for months. His colleague from the architecture firm." Her voice grew quieter. "She's pregnant." "Ah," Stephen said, understanding dawning in his expression. "So he chose her." "He chose his child," Larissa corrected, surprising herself with the insight. "In a way, I can't blame him for that. But the lies, the deception, the public humiliation..." She shook her head. "I keep wondering if I missed the signs. If I was so blinded by what I wanted our relationship to be that I couldn't see what it actually was." "We all have blind spots when it comes to love," Stephen replied. "It doesn't make what he did any less wrong." A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only by the distant sound of Noah playing with his toy trucks under the watchful eye of Stephen's sister, who had come to help for the day. "You know what's strange?" Larissa said after a while. "I'm heartbroken over Xavier's betrayal, but I'm not sure I'm heartbroken over losing him specifically. Does that make sense? It's like I'm mourning the future I thought I'd have more than the relationship itself." Stephen nodded thoughtfully. "That makes perfect sense. Sometimes what we're most attached to is the story we've created, not the actual person." As the days continued to pass, Larissa found herself growing more comfortable at Moonlight Vineyard. What had begun as a temporary refuge was slowly becoming something that felt remarkably like home. Her design projects for clients in Chicago were complemented by new work Stephen had asked her to consider, reimagining Moonlight Vineyard's labels and marketing materials. "You have an exceptional eye," he told her one evening as they reviewed her preliminary sketches. "These capture the essence of what makes this place special." The praise warmed her, not just professionally, but personally. In the month since her Yiddish abandoned wedding, she had begun to rediscover parts of herself that had been compromised or suppressed in her relationship with Xavier. Her creative instincts, her independence, her ability to find joy in simple pleasures. And through it all, Stephen's steady presence was a constant source of comfort and, increasingly, something more. She found herself noticing things about him. The way sunlight caught in his hair when he worked among the vines, the gentleness in his hands when he tucked Noah in at night, the intelligence in his expression when he discussed the science of winemaking. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing after putting Noah to bed, Larissa found herself leaning slightly against Stephen's shoulder. Neither of them acknowledged it, but neither moved away either. The weight of their shared confidences had created a new intimacy between them. "I should probably think about going back soon," Larissa said, though the words lacked conviction. "I can't hide out here forever." "You're not hiding," Stephen countered. "You're healing, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it." Larissa turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. "Why are you being so kind to me? You barely know me." Stephen was quiet, and for a moment considering. 4 years ago, when Sarah died, a stranger stayed with Noah for hours in the hospital waiting room while I signed papers and made impossible decisions. I never knew her name, never saw her again, but that small kindness kept me from falling apart completely that day. He met Larissa's eyes. Sometimes the universe puts us in a position to return the kindnesses we've been shown. And sometimes, Larissa said softly, the universe brings us exactly where we need to be, even if it's not where we plan to go. As twilight deepened around them, casting long shadows across the vineyard, Larissa felt something shift inside her. A small seed of possibility taking root where only scorched earth had been before. For the first time since being left at the altar, she felt the smallest flutter of gratitude for the path that had led her here, broken heart and all. Chapter 4. Unexpected Bloom. April gave way to May, bringing warmer days and new growth to Moonlight Vineyard. Over the past 3 weeks, Larissa had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The guest room had become personalized with her belongings. Her graphic design workspace had been set up in a sunny corner of Stephen's home office, and she had become an integral part of Noah's daily routine, helping with breakfast, reading bedtime stories, even attending his preschool's parent day when Stephen had an unavoidable meeting with distributors. She still maintained her Chicago connections professionally, but with each passing day, the thought of returning to her old life felt less appealing. Here, among the vines with Stephen and Noah, she had found an unexpected peace, a sense of belonging that had been missing even before Xavier's betrayal. Larissa stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying a light touch of makeup, the first time she had worn any since arriving at the vineyard. Her skin had taken on a sun-kissed glow from working outdoors, and her natural curls, freed from the chemical straightening she had maintained in Chicago, framed her face softly. She looked different, more herself somehow, than she had in years. A knock at the guest room door drew her attention. "Larissa, are you ready? We should leave in about 10 minutes. Stephen's voice held a note of excitement that matched her own nervous anticipation. "Almost ready," she called back. "I'll meet you downstairs." Tonight was the Spring Wine Festival in the nearby town of Meadow Creek, and Stephen had invited her to accompany him. It would be her first public outing since the wedding disaster, and while part of her was anxious about facing strangers, another part was eager to step back into the world. She smoothed down the simple yellow sundress she had ordered online, one of the few items she had purchased rather than having shipped from her Chicago apartment. The bright color complemented her dark skin, and the flowing fabric moved beautifully when she walked. It was nothing like the severe, tailored clothes she had favored in her city life. Downstairs, she found Stephen and Noah waiting in the entryway. Stephen's sister would be staying with Noah while they attended the festival, and the little boy was excitedly explaining all the activities they had planned. "And then we're gonna make a fort in the living room and watch Wall-E and eat popcorn." He broke off, noticing Larissa on the stairs. "Wow, you look pretty like sunshine, Miss Larissa." A flush of pleasure warmed her cheeks at the child's honest compliment. "Thank you, Noah. That's very sweet of you to say." She turned to Stephen, suddenly shy under his gaze. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Admiration, certainly, but something deeper too. Something that made her heart beat a little faster. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Yellow suits you." Stephen himself had traded his usual work clothes for dark jeans and a crisp blue button-down that emphasized his broad shoulders and brought out the color of his eyes. His hair, usually tousled from working outdoors, was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. He looked handsome and relaxed. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Larissa replied with a small smile. The drive to town was filled with comfortable conversation about the vineyard's latest vintage, Noah's upcoming summer activities, and Larissa's newest design project. It felt easy, natural, this growing friendship between them. Meadow Creek was a picturesque small town with a central square surrounded by historic buildings. For the festival, the square had been transformed with twinkling lights, booths from local wineries, and a stage where a jazz quartet played. The evening air was warm, filled with music, laughter, and the rich scent of wine. "Stephen, there you are!" A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair approached them as they entered the festival grounds. "We were beginning to think you wouldn't make it." "Just running a bit late, Eleanor," Stephen replied warmly. "May I introduce Larissa Jackson?" "Larissa, this is Eleanor Wilkinson, president of the local Vintners Association and owner of Willow Creek Wines." "Lovely to meet you, dear," Eleanor said, shaking Larissa's hand while giving her a curious once-over. "We've heard so much about you." Larissa's stomach tightened. Had news of her wedding disaster spread even to this small town? Sensing her discomfort, Stephen placed a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Larissa is a talented graphic designer from Chicago. She's been helping me redesign the Moonlight Vineyard labels." This wasn't exactly true. They had discussed the possibility of updating his branding, but no formal arrangement had been made. Still, Larissa appreciated the cover story that gave her a defined role beyond abandoned bride staying with a near stranger. As the evening progressed, Larissa found herself gradually relaxing. Stephen introduced her to numerous friends and colleagues, always with his hand resting lightly on her back or shoulder, a supportive presence that kept her grounded. They sampled wines from various local vineyards, Stephen explaining the nuances of each with a passion that was infectious. "You really love this, don't you?" Larissa observed as they walked between booths. "Not just your own vineyard, but the whole culture of winemaking." Stephen nodded, his face animated. "It's a perfect blend of science and art, tradition and innovation. Every vintage tells a story of the weather that year, the soil, the hands that tended the vines." He glanced at her. "It's not unlike your design work. Both take something raw and transform it into something that speaks to people." Larissa had never thought of it that way, but the comparison resonated with her. "I suppose you're right, though your medium is a bit more intoxicating than mine." He laughed, a warm, rich sound that she had come to cherish during her stay at Moonlight Vineyard. "Speaking of which, have you tried the Willow Creek Chardonnay yet? Eleanor would be mortally offended if we skipped her booth." As they approached the Willow Creek booth, Larissa noticed a striking woman with copper hair watching them intently. Something about her gaze, assessing almost predatory, made Larissa uneasy. "Stephen Amell," the woman called out, her voice carrying across the crowded space. "I was wondering when you'd make an appearance." Stephen stiffened slightly beside her. "Vivian," he acknowledged with a nod. "Good to see you." "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Vivian asked, her eyes sliding to Larissa with undisguised curiosity. "Of course. Larissa Jackson, this is Vivian Hayes. She owns Sunset Ridge Vineyard, just north of Moonlight." "Charmed," Vivian said, though her tone suggested otherwise. She turned back to Stephen. "The Northern Slope irrigation system we discussed. Have you implemented it yet? Because my yields have increased 15% since installation." As Stephen was drawn into a technical conversation about vineyard management, Larissa felt herself being subtly excluded. Vivian positioned herself to partially block Larissa, her body language making it clear this was intended to be a private discussion. Larissa took a small step back, not wanting to intrude. She was about to excuse herself to get another wine sample when she felt a presence beside her. "Don't let Vivian bother you," Eleanor said quietly, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of wine. She's been trying to get her hooks into Stephen ever since Sarah passed. 4 years of not-so-subtle pursuit, and he hasn't shown the slightest interest. Larissa accepted the offered glass. "Oh, it's not. Stephen and I aren't," she stammered, unsure how to define what they were to each other. Eleanor gave her a knowing look. "Maybe not yet, dear, But I've known Stephen since he was a boy, helping his father with the harvest. I haven't seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, since Sarah was alive." Before Larissa could process this observation, Stephen had extricated himself from Vivian and returned to her side. "Sorry about that," he said, his hand finding its familiar place at the small of her back. Vineyard shop talk can be terribly boring for non-vintners. "Not at all," Larissa replied truthfully. "I find it fascinating how passionate everyone is about their craft." The jazz quartet had given way to a small dance band, and couples were starting to fill the small dance floor set up in front of the stage. "Would you like to dance?" Stephen asked, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "If you'd rather not, I'd love to," Larissa interrupted, surprised by how much she meant it. He led her to the dance floor, just as the band began a slow, soulful rendition of "At Last." Stephen's hand settled at her waist, warm and strong, as he drew her gently against him. Larissa placed her hand on his shoulder, acutely aware of their height difference. She had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze. They moved together easily, as if they had danced 100 times before. The music washed over them, the lyrics about finding love after loneliness resonating in an unexpectedly powerful way. As they swayed to the music, the colored lights from above casting a magical glow around them, Larissa felt herself relax fully for the first time in weeks. Stephen's hand at her waist was steady and sure, his touch respectful yet intimate in a way that sent a subtle warmth through her body. The scent of him, a mixture of cedar, clean cotton, and something uniquely his own, enveloped her as they moved closer. "I've missed this," Stephen murmured, his voice a low rumble she could feel where their bodies connected. "Dancing?" Larissa asked, tilting her head to look up at him. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Connection," he clarified, "feeling like I'm not just going through the motions of living." The honesty in his voice struck a chord deep within her. "I know exactly what you mean," she replied softly. The band transitioned seamlessly into "The Way You Look Tonight," and Stephen's hand slid to the small of her back, drawing her closer still. Larissa found herself fitting perfectly against him, her head resting naturally on his shoulder as they moved as one across the floor. From across the dance floor, Larissa caught Vivian watching them, her expression a mixture of surprise and displeasure. The redhead whispered something to a companion, both of them looking at Larissa and Stephen with undisguised curiosity. "I think we're causing a stir," Larissa murmured, nodding discreetly in Vivian's direction. Stephen glanced over briefly, then returned his attention fully to Larissa. Small towns. Everyone's always interested in everyone else's business. He smiled, a private smile meant only for her. "Does it bother you?" Larissa considered the question, then shook her head. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "It doesn't." And she realized it was true. A month ago, being the center of attention at the church had been devastating. Tonight, in Stephen's arms, she found she didn't care what anyone thought. She was where she wanted to be, with someone who made her feel safe and valued. As the evening progressed, they danced to song after song, sometimes talking quietly, sometimes simply moving together in comfortable silence. Larissa couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at ease with another person, so completely herself, without the need to impress or perform. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the festival, both reluctant to end the evening but aware that Stephen's sister was waiting at home with Noah. The drive back to the vineyard was quiet, a comfortable silence between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and new awareness. Larissa gazed out the window at the star-filled sky, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside her. It felt too soon to be feeling this way about someone, and yet meeting Stephen at her lowest moment had created a bond that seemed to transcend normal timelines. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, lights glowing warmly from within, Stephen turned to her before getting out of the car. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, his voice gentle in the darkness. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an evening out that much." "Thank you for inviting me," Larissa replied. "It was exactly what I needed." They looked at each other. In the dim light of the car's interior, the air between them charged with possibility. For a moment, Larissa thought he might lean in to kiss her, and she realized with a start that she wanted him to. Instead, Stephen reached over and squeezed her hand briefly before opening his door. "We should get inside. Kate's probably wondering where we are." The moment passed, but the awareness remained. As Larissa followed Stephen into the house, thanked his sister, and listened to Noah's sleepy account of his evening from where Kate had carried him down to say goodnight, she felt as though something fundamental had changed. Later, lying in bed in the guest room that had become her temporary haven, Larissa stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth she could no longer deny. She was falling for Stephen Amell. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Was she ready for this? Was it too soon? Would opening her heart again only lead to more pain? She had no answers, only the certainty that tonight, dancing in Stephen's arms, she had felt more alive than she had in years, even before Xavier's betrayal. Outside her window, the vineyard stretched under the moonlight, rows of vines reaching hopefully toward the sky. Like the vineyard, Larissa thought, she too was growing in unexpected ways, putting down new roots in soil she had never planned to call home. Chapter 5. Summer heat. June brought sweltering temperatures to Moonlight Vineyard. The vines thrived. In the heat, their clusters of tiny green grapes swelling with promise, while Larissa, Stephen and Noah developed a new summer routine. Mornings were for early work before the worst of the heat, afternoons for indoor projects or trips to the nearby lake, and evenings for stargazing on the porch with homemade ice cream. Larissa had officially moved out of the guest room and into a small cottage on the property, a former caretaker's residence that Stephen had renovated years ago but never rented out. The space gave her independence while keeping her close to the vineyard work she had come to love and the people who had unexpectedly become so important to her. "Higher, Miss Larissa, push me higher!" Noah called from the tire swing Stephen had hung from an ancient oak tree. The boys' laughter carried across the vineyard on the warm summer breeze, a sound of pure joy that never failed to make Larissa smile. "Any higher and you'll be an orbit spaceman," she replied, giving him another gentle push. She had grown to love this child with his curious mind and open heart, his ability to find wonder in the simplest things. From the porch, Stephen watched them, a tender expression on his face. Since the night of the wine festival a month ago, now something had shifted between them. Neither had spoken of it directly, but it was there in the lingering touches, the shared glances, the way they gravitated toward each other in any room. "Daddy, come swing with us," Noah called, spotting his father. Stephen set down the ledgers he had been reviewing and joined them under the oak, its dense foliage providing blessed relief from the afternoon sun. "My turn to push," he said, trading places with Larissa. There, hands brushed in the exchange, and Larissa felt that now familiar flutter in her stomach at his touch. She watched as Stephen expertly pushed his son, making the boy squeal with delight as the swing went higher. The domesticity of the scene struck her with unexpected force. She had once imagined similar moments with Xavier and their future children, but those dreams had always felt abstract, theoretical. This was real, a father and son playing in the golden summer light, their laughter genuine, their connection palpable, and somehow, against all odds, she had become part of this picture. "Miss Larissa, watch me jump," Noah called, preparing to launch himself from the swing at its highest point. "Noah, wait," she started, maternal instinct kicking in, but Stephen caught her arm gently. "It's okay," he assured her. "He does this all the time." The grass is soft here." Sure enough, Noah sailed through the air with practiced ease, landing on his feet with a triumphant "ta-da" before immediately running back for another turn. Stephen's hand lingered on her arm, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "You've become quite protective of him," he observed, his voice warm with approval. Larissa felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Is that overstepping?" "I don't mean to—" "Not at all," Stephen interrupted softly. "He adores you, Larissa, and seeing you with him—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "It means more than I can say." Their gazes held, the moment stretching between them filled with unspoken feelings. Larissa was acutely aware of his hand on her arm, the warmth of his body close to hers, the way his eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. The moment was broken by Noah's return, demanding another push on the swing. The afternoon continued, the three of them playing together, laughing, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. But something had changed. A threshold had been crossed, an acknowledgement made, if only in glances and touches. Later that evening, after Noah had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses goodnight, Larissa and Stephen sat on the porch of her cottage, sharing a bottle of Moonlight Vineyard's award-winning Cabernet and watching fireflies dance among the vines. "I submitted my designs for your new labels today," Larissa said, breaking the comfortable silence. She'd been working on rebranding the vineyard's packaging for weeks, finding in the project a perfect blend of her professional skills and her growing love for this place. "I can't wait to see them," Stephen replied, refilling her glass. "Though, I have to admit, I'm conflicted about you finishing the project." "Oh?" Larissa turned to him, curious. "Why's that?" Stephen looked at her, the porch light casting half his face in shadow. "Because it was the official reason for you to stay. And I don't want you to leave, Larissa." The directness of his statement took her breath away. They had been dancing around this conversation for weeks, neither wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had found. "Stephen," she began, not sure what she was going to say. He set down his wine glass and took her hand in both of his. "I know it's complicated. I know it might seem too soon after what happened with Xavier, and maybe it is. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for." His hands were warm around hers, slightly calloused from vineyard work, utterly reassuring in their strength. "But I need you to know how I feel. These past 2 months with you here, they've been the happiest I've had since losing Sarah. You've brought something back to life in me in this home, in Noah." Larissa felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, never of you, but of trusting my own judgment again, of believing in something that might disappear." Stephen nodded, understanding, in his gaze. "I know. And I'll wait, Larissa. However long you need, I'm not going anywhere." In the warm summer night, surrounded by the scent of ripening grapes and the gentle chorus of cicadas, Larissa made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that began as tentative as a question, but quickly deepened into something more certain. Stephen's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch reverent as he returned her kiss with restrained passion. Larissa felt herself melting into him, all the walls she had built since Xavier's betrayal crumbling in the face of this man's steady, unwavering care. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Stephen rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Larissa Jackson," he whispered. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in that church, heartbroken but still standing." Larissa closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her like a healing balm. "I'm falling in love with you too," she replied, the admission feeling like setting down a heavy burden she had been carrying too long. And it terrifies me how much I want this, want us to be real. It is real, Stephen assured her, drawing her into his arms. The most real thing I've known in years. They stayed on the porch until well past midnight, sometimes talking, sometimes kissing, sometimes simply holding each other in comfortable silence. When Stephen finally rose to leave, promising to see her in the morning, Larissa felt a sense of peace settle over her that had eluded her for months. Whatever happened next, she was no longer running from her past. She was walking, eyes open and heart hopeful, into a future she had never imagined, but now couldn't picture without Stephen and Noah in it. As she got ready for bed, Larissa caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by the difference. From the broken woman who had arrived at Moonlight Vineyard 2 months ago, her eyes were clear, her smile genuine, her posture confident. She was no longer Xavier's abandoned bride. She was simply Larissa, stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly, joyfully in love again. Chapter 6. Tangled Vines. July brought both bounty and challenges to Moonlight Vineyard. The grapes were developing beautifully, promising an excellent harvest. But the relentless heat had created drought conditions that required constant attention to irrigation systems. Stephen spent long days in the fields, often returning home exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. Larissa had fully embraced her new role, both at the vineyard and in Stephen and Noah's lives. Her cottage had become a welcoming haven, decorated with flea market finds and brightened with wildflowers. She split her time between remote graphic design work for clients in Chicago and helping Stephen with the vineyard's marketing and business operations. And in the evenings, after Noah was asleep, she and Stephen explored their deepening relationship with the careful joy of two people who had known loss and were determined to treasure every moment of their second chance. Larissa was humming to herself as she headed toward the main house, a basket of fresh herbs for their pizza lunch in hand. The day was perfect. Blue sky, gentle breeze, sunlight dappling through the leaves of the ancient oaks that dotted the property. So perfect that the sight of an unfamiliar car in Stephen's driveway barely registered as concerning at first. Probably just a delivery, or perhaps one of the seasonal workers Stephen had mentioned hiring for the approaching harvest. It wasn't until she rounded the corner of the house and saw Stephen on the porch, his posture tense as he spoke to a woman whose back was to Larissa, that a flicker of unease disturbed her contentment. And then the woman turned, and Larissa's basket of herbs tumbled from suddenly nerveless fingers. It was Vivian Hayes, the redhead from the wine festival. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, clutching her hand, was a small boy of about 5 or 6, with copper hair exactly like Vivian's, and azure eyes identical to Stephen's. "Larissa," Stephen called, his voice strained as he spotted her frozen at the edge of the garden. "Please come here." Vivian turned to look at her, triumph gleaming in her green eyes. "Oh yes, do join us, Ms. Jackson. This concerns you too, now that you've become so involved with Stephen." The boy beside her looked confused and uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he glanced between the adults. He was the spitting image of Noah, but with Vivian's copper coloring instead of Sarah's darker features. Larissa's mind raced as she forced her feet to move toward the porch. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not when she had finally opened her heart, finally trusted again. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady considering the chaos of her thoughts. Stephen stepped toward her, anguish written across his features. "Vivian claims that James is my son," he said, gesturing to the boy. That there was a night after Sarah died, when I was at my lowest. She says she never told me because she wanted to raise him herself without complications." "And now?" Larissa asked, looking directly at Vivian. The woman smiled, a cat with the canary smile that made Larissa's skin crawl. "Now circumstances have changed. James deserves to know his father and his brother. She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Don't you want to meet your brother, James? The boy nodded shyly, clearly having been prepared for this moment. Is Noah here? He asked in a small voice. He's with his aunt, Stephen replied automatically. He'll be back for lunch. Larissa's heart ached for both boys, innocent victims, in whatever game Vivian was playing, but a small, suspicious part of her couldn't help but wonder at the timing. Why now, after nearly 5 years? Why, just as Stephen's relationship with Larissa was solidifying into something real and lasting? As soon as they were inside, Larissa turned to Stephen. Is it possible? She asked quietly. Could he be yours? Stephen ran a hand through his hair, distress evident in every line of his body. I don't know. Maybe. Those first months after Sarah died are a blur of grief and alcohol. There was one night at a Vintners Association event. Vivian drove me home. I was in no condition to drive. I remember her coming inside, offering comfort, but I thought I'd stopped things before. He trailed off, looking stricken. But you're not sure, Larissa finished for him. No, he admitted, his eyes pleading for understanding. Larissa, I swear to you, if I had known there was even a possibility of a child, I would have stepped up. I would never abandon my responsibility. Larissa believed him. In the months she had known Stephen, his devotion to Noah had been absolute, his character consistently honorable. But that didn't make the situation any less painful or complicated. What happens now? She asked, forcing herself to be practical, despite the emotional turmoil inside her. DNA test first of all, Stephen said firmly. But Larissa, looking at him, I don't think there's much doubt. He looks so much like Noah, like my father's side of the family. This was one of the things Larissa loved most about Stephen. His unwavering sense of responsibility, his commitment to doing what was right, no matter the personal cost. But in this moment, that very quality threatened the fragile happiness they had begun to build. Vivian will use this to try to get closer to you, Larissa said, voicing what they both knew to be true. Stephen's jaw tightened. Her motivations don't change my responsibilities, he said firmly. If James is my son, then he deserves to have me in his life. And Noah deserves to know his brother. Chapter 7. Truth Among the Vines. Larissa, Stephen called, his voice strained as he spotted her frozen at the edge of the garden. Please, come here. Vivian turned to look at her, triumph gleaming in her green eyes. Oh yes, do join us, Ms. Jackson. This concerns you too, now that you've become so involved with Stephen. The boy beside her looked confused and uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he glanced between the adults. He was the spitting image of Noah, but with Vivian's copper coloring instead of Sarah's darker features. Larissa's mind raced as she forced her feet to move toward the porch. This couldn't be happening, not again, not when she had finally opened her heart, finally trusted again. What's going on? She asked, her voice remarkably steady considering the chaos of her thoughts. Stephen stepped toward her, anguish written across his features. Vivian claims that James is my son, he said, gesturing to the boy. That there was a night after Sarah died when I was at my lowest. She says she never told me because she wanted to raise him herself without complications. And now? Larissa asked, looking directly at Vivian. The woman smiled, a cat with the canary smile that made Larissa's skin crawl. Now circumstances have changed. James deserves to know his father and his brother. She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Don't you want to meet your brother, James? The boy nodded shyly, clearly having been prepared for this moment. Is Noah here? He asked in a small voice. He's with his aunt, Stephen replied automatically. He'll be back for lunch. Larissa's heart ached for both boys, innocent victims in whatever game Vivian was playing. But a small, suspicious part of her couldn't help but wonder at the timing. Why now, after nearly 5 years? Why just as Stephen's relationship with Larissa was solidifying into something real and lasting. "I'd like to speak with Stephen alone," Larissa said firmly, finding her voice. "And I'm sure James might like a glass of lemonade after your drive. There's some in the kitchen." Vivian looked as though she might object, but then shrugged elegantly. "Of course. Come, James. Let's get something to drink while the adults talk." As soon as they were inside, Larissa turned to Stephen. "Is it possible?" she asked quietly. "Could he be yours?" Stephen ran a hand through his hair, distress evident in every line of his body. "I don't know. Maybe. Those first months after Sarah died are a blur of grief and alcohol. There was one night at a Vintners Association event. Vivian drove me home. I was in no condition to drive. I remember her coming inside, offering comfort, but I thought I'd stopped things before." He trailed off, looking stricken. "But you're not sure?" Larissa finished for him. "No," he admitted, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Larissa, I swear to you, if I had known there was even a possibility of a child, I would have stepped up. I would never abandon my responsibility." Larissa believed him. In the months she had known Stephen, his devotion to Noah had been absolute, his character consistently honorable, but that didn't make the situation any less painful or complicated. "What happens now?" she asked, forcing herself to be practical. Despite the emotional turmoil inside her, "DNA test first of all," Stephen said firmly. "But Larissa," looking at him, "I don't think there's much doubt. He looks so much like Noah, like my father's side of the family." Larissa nodded, feeling a cold weight settle in her stomach. "And if he is yours, then he's mine," Stephen said simply. "And I'll do whatever it takes to be a proper father to him, just as I am to Noah." This was one of the things Larissa loved most about Stephen, his unwavering sense of responsibility, his commitment to doing what was right, no matter the personal cost. But in this moment, that very quality threatened the fragile happiness they had begun to build. "Vivian will use this to try to get closer to you," Larissa said, voicing what they both knew to be true. Stephen's jaw tightened. "Her motivations don't change my responsibilities," he said firmly. "If James is my son, then he deserves to have me in his life, and Noah deserves to know his brother." Larissa knew he was right, but the situation still felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just when she had finally allowed herself to believe in love again, to imagine a future with Stephen and Noah, this complication threatened to change everything. "What about us?" she asked quietly, voicing the question that hung between them. Stephen reached for her hands, holding them tightly in his own. "Nothing changes how I feel about you, Larissa. Nothing." His eyes were fierce with conviction. "I love you. That doesn't change because my past has caught up with me." Before she could respond, the sound of a car door slamming announced Kate's arrival with Noah. Moments later, the little boy came bounding around the corner of the house, his face lighting up when he saw Larissa. "Ms. Larissa, Aunt Kate let me have 2 scoops of ice cream after lunch," he called as he ran toward her. Larissa forced a smile, kneeling to catch him in a hug. "Did she now? No wonder you're so energetic." Noah pulled back, his expression suddenly curious as he noticed the tension between the adults. "What's wrong?" "Daddy looks sad." Stephen knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Noah, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Someone very important." The little boy looked confused but nodded solemnly. "Okay. Let's go inside," Stephen said, rising and offering his hand to Noah. He glanced at Larissa. "Will you come too?" She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Whatever happened next, she would face it alongside Stephen. Her own heartbreak at the altar had taught her that running from difficulty solved nothing. Inside, they found Vivian and James sitting at the kitchen table, the boy quietly sipping lemonade while Vivian examined the newly designed wine labels. Larissa had left spread across the counter. "These are quite good," she commented, looking up as they entered. "Your work, I presume." Larissa nodded stiffly, her attention focused on the two boys who were eyeing each other with undisguised curiosity. "Noah," Stephen said gently, "this is James. It looks like he might be your brother." Noah's eyes widened. "My brother? Like Michael is to Emma at school?" "Yes, something like that," Stephen confirmed. Noah approached James cautiously. "Do you like space?" he asked, zeroing in on what was clearly the most important qualification for friendship in his mind. James nodded, a shy smile appearing. "I have a telescope. My mom got it for my birthday." "I have one too," Noah exclaimed. "Daddy and I look at the stars every clear night. Do you want to see my NASA posters?" Just like that, the ice was broken. Within minutes, the boys were headed to Noah's room, their childish voices fading down the hallway as they compared favorite planets and space missions. The three adults left in the kitchen regarded each other in silence for a long moment. "Well," Vivian said finally, a satisfied smile playing at her lips, "that went better than expected." "What exactly do you want, Vivian?" Stephen asked bluntly. "After nearly 6 years of silence, why come forward now?" She shrugged elegantly, her copper hair catching the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. "As I said, James deserves to know his father, and recent changes in my circumstances have made me reconsider my previous decision." "What changes?" Larissa asked, her designer's eye for detail catching the subtle signs of strain beneath Vivian's polished exterior. The slightly worn edge of her otherwise expensive blouse, the scuff on her leather handbag. Vivian's eyes hardened slightly. "My vineyard has experienced some financial setbacks. The drought has been particularly hard on our crops this year." "So this is about money," Stephen said flatly. "This is about ensuring my son, our son, has the stability he deserves," Vivian corrected, her voice taking on a steely edge. "I've managed alone for nearly 6 years, Stephen. I'm not asking for handouts, but James should have the same advantages as Noah, the same inheritance rights to Moonlight Vineyard someday." The calculated nature of Vivian's approach made Larissa's blood boil, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional wouldn't help Stephen navigate this treacherous situation. "We'll need a DNA test," Stephen said firmly. "And if James is mine, then yes, I'll provide financial support and be part of his life. But don't mistake my sense of responsibility for something more, Vivian." The redhead's smile turned predatory. "We'll see. Children have a way of bringing people together, don't they?" Her gaze slid to Larissa, and tearing others apart, the thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Larissa met Vivian's gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. She had already survived one man's betrayal. She wouldn't let this woman's manipulations destroy what she and Stephen were building. "I think we should focus on what's best for the boys," Larissa said carefully. "They're the innocent ones in all this." Stephen shot her a grateful look. "Exactly. And right now, they seem to be getting along well. Let's not complicate things with adult issues." Vivian's perfectly manicured nails tapped lightly against the granite countertop. "Of course. The children come first. Which is why I was thinking perhaps James could stay here for a few days to get to know Noah better and his father." Stephen looked taken aback by the suggestion. "I don't think that's a good idea. Not yet. We need to take this slowly, Vivian, for everyone's sake." "But surely you want to spend time with your son," Vivian pressed, her voice honey-sweet, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Time you've already lost?" Larissa watched Stephen struggle with the guilt Vivian was so expertly wielding. She placed a supportive hand on his arm. "Maybe we could start with day visits," she suggested. "James could come for lunch tomorrow, perhaps stay for dinner. That would give everyone time to adjust." Stephen squeezed her hand gratefully. "That sounds reasonable. What do you think, Vivian?" The woman's green eyes narrowed slightly at their united front, but she nodded after a moment. "If that's what you think is best, for now." The boys' laughter echoed down the hallway, a reminder of what was truly at stake. Larissa felt a surge of protective love, not just for Noah, whom she had come to adore, but for James as well, an innocent child caught in his mother's schemes. "I should check on them," Stephen said, clearly eager to escape the tension in the kitchen. As he left, Vivian turned her full attention to Larissa. "You've settled in quite nicely here," she observed, her gaze sweeping over Larissa's casual clothes, the comfortable way she moved around Stephen's kitchen. "Quite a change from being left at the altar in Chicago, isn't it?" Larissa stiffened. "How do you—" "Small towns, big gossip," Vivian interrupted with a shrug. "When the mysterious woman staying at Stephen's turned out to be a jilted bride, well, people talk." The revelation that her humiliation had been local knowledge all along sent a flush of embarrassment through Larissa, but she refused to let it show. "Then you should also know that Stephen helped me when I was at my lowest point. He's a good man, a kind man." "Oh, I'm well aware of Stephen's kindness," Vivian replied, her tone making the word sound like a weakness. "He's always had a savior complex, first with Sarah when she got sick, now with you." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "But you should know, Larissa, I was his first choice, before Sarah, before you. We had something special once, until his sense of duty interfered." Larissa didn't know whether to believe her, but she kept her expression neutral. "The past is the past, Vivian. What matters now is the present and the future of those boys." "How mature of you," Vivian said with a slight smile. "But tell me honestly, are you prepared to raise another woman's child? To share Stephen's attention, his resources, his love? Because if James is his son, and I have no doubt the DNA test will confirm it, then I will be a permanent part of your lives, of Stephen's life, forever." The words were calculated to wound, to plant seeds of doubt, and despite her best efforts, Larissa felt them take root. Could she do this? Could she build a life with Stephen knowing that Vivian would always be there, waiting for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to drive a wedge between them? Before she could respond, Stephen returned with the boys, both chattering excitedly about a model rocket Noah had recently built. "And Daddy said we can launch it on Saturday in the big field," Noah was explaining. "You could come too if your Mum says it's okay." James looked up at Vivian with hopeful eyes. "Can I, Mom? Please?" For a brief moment, genuine maternal affection softened Vivian's sharp features. "We'll see, sweetheart. It depends on what your father and I decide." The pointed emphasis on "your father" didn't escape Larissa's notice, nor did the way Vivian placed her hand on Stephen's arm as she spoke, a gesture of intimacy that made Larissa's stomach clench despite her best efforts to remain calm. "It's getting late," Stephen said, gently disengaging from Vivian's touch. "You two probably have a long drive back." Vivian nodded reluctantly. "Yes, we should go. James, say goodbye to Noah and his father." The way she hesitated before the last two words made it clear she was already positioning Stephen as James's father, DNA test or no DNA test. James hugged Noah with the easy affection of children, then looked up at Stephen uncertainly. "Bye. You can call me Stephen for now," Stephen said gently, kneeling to the boy's level. "Until we figure everything out. Is that okay?" James nodded, seemingly relieved. "Bye, Stephen. Thanks for showing me your telescope." "Anytime, buddy," Stephen replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll see you tomorrow for lunch, okay?" After Vivian and James left, a heavy silence fell over the house. Noah, picking up on the adult tension, asked if he could watch a movie in his room. Once he was settled, Stephen and Larissa retreated to the porch, both needing the peace of the vineyard spread before them to process what had just happened. "I'm sorry," Stephen said finally, his voice hollow. "I never expected, never thought." Larissa reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "You have nothing to apologize for. If James is your son, then this was always a possibility. But the timing, Stephen said bitterly, just when we finally... I know, Larissa said softly. Vivian made it very clear that wasn't a coincidence. Stephen turned to her, alarm in his eyes. What did she say to you? When I was with the boys? Larissa hesitated, not wanting to add to his burden, but knowing honesty was their only path forward. She implied that you two had a history, that she was your first choice before Sarah. Stephen's face darkened. That's a gross distortion of the truth. Vivian and I dated briefly in college. It was nothing serious, at least not to me. When I met Sarah, I ended things with Vivian. She didn't take it well. And yet, after Sarah died, I was a mess, Larissa, Stephen admitted, shame evident in his voice. Drinking too much, barely functioning. Vivian was there, offering comfort, and I was weak. He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. But it was one night, one mistake. I never imagined it would lead to this. Larissa nodded, processing this new information. Part of her wanted to walk away, to protect herself from the inevitable complications this situation would bring. But a larger part, the part that had grown to love not just Stephen, but Noah, couldn't bear the thought of leaving them to face Vivian's manipulations alone. What do you need from me? She asked simply. Stephen's eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, more profound. Just stay, if you can. If it's not too much to ask. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Larissa leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I didn't sign up for anything, Stephen. I fell in love with you, with Noah, with this place. And love means facing challenges together, not running when things get difficult. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. I don't deserve you, he murmured into her hair. Probably not, she agreed with a small smile, trying to lighten the moment. But you're stuck with me anyway. As the sun set over the vineyard, casting long shadows across the rows of vines, Larissa tried to quiet the voice of doubt in her mind. She had chosen to stay, to fight for this unexpected love. But as the shadows lengthened, so did her concerns about what the coming days would bring. Chapter 8. Harvest Storms. The DNA test confirmed what they had all suspected. James was indeed Stephen's biological son. The results arrived on a scorching August morning, delivered by courier to the main house where Stephen, Larissa, and Noah were having breakfast. Stephen read the report in silence, his expression giving nothing away. Then he folded the paper carefully and looked at Larissa across the table. It's positive, he said simply. 99.9% probability. Larissa nodded, having prepared herself for this outcome. Over the past 3 weeks, as they had waited for the results, James had visited the vineyard several times. The resemblance between him and Noah was undeniable, not just in physical appearance, but in mannerisms, interests, even the way they both tilted their heads when concentrating. Are you okay? She asked, reaching across the table to squeeze Stephen's hand. He gave her a wan smile. I'm not sure okay is the right word. I have a son I never knew about, a son who's missed 5 years of his father's presence in his life. But you're here now, Larissa reminded him gently, and you're going to be an amazing father to him, just as you are to Noah. Noah, who had been quietly eating his cereal, looked up at the mention of his name. Is James really my brother now? He asked, his young face serious. Stephen nodded, his expression softening as he turned to his son. Yes, buddy, James is your half-brother. That means you share the same father, me, but you had different mothers. Noah considered this information with the straightforward logic of a 5-year-old. So that's why his hair is orange and mine isn't because he had a different mom? That's right, Stephen confirmed. Your mom had dark hair like yours. James's mom has red hair. "Is Ms. Larissa going to be our mom now?" Noah asked innocently, causing both adults to freeze. Larissa felt her heart race at the question. She and Stephen hadn't discussed marriage or adoption, though their relationship had deepened significantly over the summer. The complication of James and Vivian had put any such conversations on hold. Stephen recovered first. "Ms. Larissa is very special to both of us," he said carefully, "but we're taking things one step at a time, okay?" Noah nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and returned to his cereal. But the question lingered in the air between Larissa and Stephen, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. "I should call Vivian," Stephen said after a moment. "Let her know the results." Larissa nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety that formed in her stomach at the mention of the other woman's name. Since that first confrontation, Vivian had been scrupulously polite during the handovers of James, but there was always an undercurrent of tension, a subtle reminder that she held a powerful connection to Stephen that Larissa could never share. As Stephen stepped outside to make the call, Larissa busied herself clearing the breakfast dishes, her mind racing with the implications of the test results. Legal custody arrangements, financial support, the integration of James into their lives on a more permanent basis. All of these issues would need to be addressed. And hovering over all of it was the San Francisco wine competition, now just 1 week away. Their plans to attend together seemed frivolous in light of recent developments, but Stephen insisted they should still go. "The competition is crucial for the vineyard's future," he had argued when Larissa suggested postponing their trip. "And we need some time alone, away from all of this, to figure out our next steps." Larissa had agreed, though she wondered how they could truly get away from a situation that would forever be part of their lives. Vivian had made it clear she expected to be involved in any major decisions regarding James, and by extension, anything that affected Stephen's financial situation or family dynamics. Stephen returned from his call, his expression troubled. "Vivian wants to meet this afternoon to discuss arrangements," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's bringing her lawyer." Larissa's heart sank. "Her lawyer? Stephen, you need representation too." "I know. I've called Tom Barrett in town. He can see me at 11. Stephen sighed heavily. "This is exactly what I didn't want, turning James into a legal battleground." Larissa moved to his side, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "You're doing the right thing, protecting yourself and Noah. And James too, in the long run." Stephen held her tightly, drawing strength from her presence. "What would I do without you?" he murmured against her hair. "Let's hope you never have to find out," she replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the heaviness in her heart. The meeting with Vivian and her lawyer took place at the Riverside Inn in town, neutral ground chosen to keep the children out of the discussion. Larissa had offered to stay behind, but Stephen insisted he wanted her there. "You're part of this family now," he had said with quiet certainty. "I need your support." Family. The word filled Larissa with both joy and trepidation. She had come to love Noah as if he were her own, and she could easily see herself coming to care for James as well. But Vivian's presence would always complicate matters, a shadow over what might otherwise have been a simple blending of lives. The Riverside Inn's private dining room was elegant but impersonal, with heavy curtains blocking the summer sunshine and lending the proceedings an artificial, claustrophobic air. Vivian was already seated when they arrived, looking immaculate in a tailored burgundy dress that emphasized her copper hair. Beside her sat a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, a briefcase open on the table before him. Stephen's lawyer, Tom Barrett, was a stark contrast, a down-to-earth local attorney in a rumpled blazer with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He greeted Stephen and Larissa warmly, then extended a professional hand to Vivian and her counsel. "Shall we begin?" Vivian suggested once they were all seated. "I believe we're all in agreement that establishing James's legal and financial rights is the priority here." The meeting that followed was tense and occasionally hostile, despite Tom's best efforts to keep things civil. Vivian's demands were substantial, not just child support and shared custody, but also what she called retroactive compensation for the years she had raised James alone, plus a claim on a percentage of Moonlight Vineyard's future profits as part of James's inheritance rights. "This is extortion, not negotiation," Stephen said at one point, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is ensuring our son's future," Vivian countered smoothly. "Surely you don't begrudge him that?" Throughout the discussion, Larissa remained mostly silent, offering support through her presence and the occasional squeeze of Stephen's hand under the table. But when Vivian began suggesting that James should spend every other week at Moonlight Vineyard, Larissa couldn't stay quiet. "That would be incredibly disruptive for both boys," she pointed out. "They're just getting to know each other. Weekends and some holidays would be more stable for everyone involved." Vivian's green eyes narrowed. "I wasn't aware that Stephen's girlfriend had decision-making authority in my son's life. Larissa is an integral part of my household and Noah's life," Stephen said firmly. "Her input matters to me, and she has valid points about what's best for the children." The meeting eventually ended with an interim agreement. James would spend alternating weekends at Moonlight Vineyard, plus one afternoon each week after school. Child support would be substantial but reasonable, with the more complex financial demands set aside for further negotiation. It wasn't ideal, but it was a starting point. As they drove back to the vineyard, Stephen reached for Larissa's hand. "Thank you for being there," he said quietly, "for speaking up when you did." "I just want what's best for the boys," Larissa replied honestly. "And for you." Stephen's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "You know this changes things for us, don't you? Our timeline, our plans." Larissa nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I know. But not how I feel about you," he added quickly, glancing at her with intense eyes. "If anything, seeing you stand up for our family today only made me love you more. Our family." The words echoed in Larissa's mind as they pulled into the vineyard's long driveway. Despite the complications, despite Vivian's manipulations, they were building something real here. A blended family bound by love rather than perfect circumstances. That evening, with Noah asleep upstairs, Larissa and Stephen sat on the porch. Swing, a glass of Moonlight Vineyard's Reserve Cabernet shared between them. The vineyard stretched before them, heavy with nearly ripe fruit, the promise of the coming harvest visible in the swelling grapes. "I've been thinking," Stephen said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about the competition in San Francisco next week." Larissa tensed, expecting him to suggest canceling. "What about it?" "I think we should still go," he said, surprising her. "In fact, I think it's more important than ever that we take this time for us." Relief flooded through her. "Are you sure? With everything that's happening with James?" "The arrangements are set for the next month. Kate is happy to stay with Noah, and James will be with Vivian. The vineyard will survive without me for 3 days. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Larissa, I don't want Vivian's reappearance to derail what we're building together. This trip matters. To us. To the vineyard's future." Larissa squeezed his hands, touched by his determination to protect their relationship amid the chaos. "Then, we'll go," she agreed, "and it will be wonderful." The week leading up to their departure was a whirlwind of activity. The first grapes of the season were ready for harvesting, requiring all hands on deck at the vineyard. James spent his first weekend at Moonlight under the new arrangement, a bittersweet success as the boys bonded easily while tension simmered between the adults. Vivian made a point of arriving early to pick James up on Sunday evening. Accidentally, interrupting a private moment between Larissa and Stephen on the porch. Her practiced apology did nothing to disguise the satisfaction in her eyes at finding them in an embrace. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her tone making it clear that interrupting had been precisely her intention. James was so excited about his weekend that I couldn't wait to hear all about it. The incident left a sour taste that lingered through the next day's preparations for their trip. But as they finally boarded the plane to San Francisco on Wednesday morning, Larissa felt the weight of recent weeks beginning to lift. For 3 days, they would be just Stephen and Larissa, not complicated co-parents, not reluctant adversaries. In a custody arrangement, just two people in love, exploring a beautiful city together. The flight was short but luxurious, Stephen having splurged on first-class tickets. As they sipped champagne above the clouds, Larissa found herself relaxing truly for the first time in weeks. "To new beginnings," Stephen said, clinking his glass gently against hers, "and to the future of Moonlight Vineyard." "To us," Larissa added softly, "whatever comes next." San Francisco welcomed them with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies. Their hotel, a boutique property in Nob Hill, offered sweeping views of the bay and the city's iconic hills. The room was elegant and intimate, with a king-size bed draped in fine linens and a private balcony perfect for evening wine tastings. "This is gorgeous," Larissa breathed as they entered the suite. "You didn't have to go to such expense." Stephen wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to the sensitive spot just below her ear. "Yes, I did," he murmured. "You deserve this. We deserve this." A pleasant shiver ran down Larissa's spine at his touch. They had maintained physical intimacy despite the chaos of recent weeks, finding in each other's arms a sanctuary from the stress of their situation. But here, away from the vineyard and its complications, there was a new freedom to their connection. "How much time do we have before the welcome reception?" Larissa asked, turning in his arms to face him. Stephen glanced at his watch, a slow smile spreading across his face as he caught her meaning. "Just enough," he replied, before capturing her lips in a kiss that left no doubt about his intentions. Their lovemaking was both tender and urgent, a reaffirmation of their commitment to each other, despite the obstacles they faced. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the luxurious sheets, Larissa's head pillowed on Stephen's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare back. "I love you," he said simply, the words falling into the peaceful quiet between them. Larissa raised herself up on one elbow to look into his eyes, finding there all the certainty she needed. "I love you too," she replied. "No matter what." The wine competition's welcome reception was held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel with hundreds of vintners from around the world presenting their finest offerings. Stephen, looking handsome in a charcoal suit, was in his element, confidently discussing Moonlight Vineyard's unique terroir and maturation techniques with judges and fellow winemakers. Larissa, elegant in a form-fitting emerald dress that enhanced her dark skin, beautifully stayed by his side, absorbing the industry knowledge and occasionally offering insights from her marketing perspective. They made a striking couple, drawing approving glances and whispered comments about the handsome vintner and his gorgeous companion. "Stephen Amell, as I live and breathe," a deep voice called from behind them. "I thought that was you." They turned to find a distinguished older man with silver hair and a knowing smile extending his hand to Stephen. "Richard, it's been years," Stephen exclaimed, shaking the man's hand warmly. "Larissa, this is Richard Thornton, one of the most respected wine critics in the country. He was my mentor when I was just starting out." "A pleasure, Ms. Jackson," Richard said, kissing Larissa's hand with old-world charm. "I've been hearing remarkable things about the new direction at Moonlight Vineyard. Your influence, I understand?" Larissa blushed slightly at the recognition. "Stephen's the winemaker. I just help with the presentation." "Don't underestimate the power of presentation, my dear," Richard replied with a wink. "In this business, the story of the wine is almost as important as what's in the bottle." He turned back to Stephen. "I'm looking forward to tasting your Reserve Cabernet tomorrow. The 2022 was exceptional. I gave it 94 points, if you recall." Stephen nodded, pride evident in his expression. "This vintage is even better, more complex, with a longer finish." As Richard moved on to greet other guests, Larissa marveled at the respect Stephen commanded in this world. He had built something truly special at Moonlight Vineyard, something worth fighting for and protecting. The evening progressed pleasantly, with Stephen introducing Larissa to key industry figures and potential distributors. By the time they returned to their hotel, both were exhausted but exhilarated by the positive reception. "I think we made some important connections tonight," Stephen said as they prepared for bed. "If the judging goes well tomorrow, we could be looking at national distribution for the Reserve line." Larissa smiled at his enthusiasm. "Your wines deserve to be widely appreciated. I'm so proud of you, Stephen." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Your redesign of the labels, your marketing insights. You've given Moonlight Vineyard a new identity, a clearer voice." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Larissa felt a sense of peace wash over her. Despite the complications waiting for them back home, they had this connection, this partnership, this shared vision of a future together. The next day was devoted to the formal tastings, with Stephen presenting Moonlight Vineyard's Reserve Cabernet to a panel of distinguished judges. Larissa watched from the sidelines, heart swelling with pride as he spoke with quiet confidence about the wine's journey from vine to bottle, the specific challenges of that year's growing season, and the traditional techniques he had combined. With innovative approaches, the drought actually concentrated the flavors, he explained as the judges swirled, sniffed, and tasted. "We reduced irrigation strategically to stress the vines just enough to produce smaller, more intense berries." One judge, a stern-looking woman with decades of experience evident in her discerning gaze, nodded appreciatively. "Bold choice. It paid off. There's remarkable complexity here. Blackcurrant, tobacco, a hint of vanilla from the oak, and something else, almost a mineral quality. The limestone in our soil," Stephen confirmed with a smile. "It gives all our reds that distinctive finish." By the end of the tasting, Larissa could tell from the judges' expressions that Stephen's wine had made a significant impression. As they moved away from the booth, several making notes with thoughtful expressions, Stephen exhaled deeply. "That went well," he said, tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Better than I'd hoped, actually." Larissa squeezed his hand. They loved it. I could see it in their faces. The rest of the day passed in a blur of networking, attending panel discussions, and sampling competitors' offerings. By evening, they were both ready for a break from the wine world. "Let's have dinner somewhere with no connection to vineyards," Larissa suggested as they returned to their hotel to change. "Somewhere we can just be us for a few hours." Stephen agreed enthusiastically, and they found themselves at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the bay, far from the competition crowds. The intimate setting, with its candlelight and breathtaking views, created a cocoon of privacy that they had rarely experienced at the vineyard. Over fresh oysters and grilled sea bass, they talked about everything except Vivian and the custody situation, their childhoods, their dreams for the future, the places they hoped to visit together someday. It was as if they were on a first date, discovering each other anew without the shadow of recent complications. "I've been thinking," Stephen said, as they shared a decadent chocolate dessert, "about expanding the visitor experiences at Moonlight. offering overnight stays in luxury cottages among the vines, guided tasting tours, maybe even small weddings in the old barrel room. Larissa's eyes lit up. That's a brilliant idea. With your wine quality and the property's natural beauty, you could create something truly special. We could, Stephen corrected gently, if you're willing to be part of it. Your design sensibility, your eye for creating experiences, it would make all the difference. The implication behind his words, a long-term future together, professional and personal, hung in the air between them. Larissa felt a surge of emotion, a vision of what might be unfolding before her. "I'd love that," she said softly. Creating something together, watching it grow. Stephen reached across the table to take her hand, his expression suddenly serious. "Larissa, I know the timing is complicated. With James, with Vivian, with everything that's happened. But I want you to know that none of that changes how I feel. About you, about us." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd never find love again. I focused entirely on Noah and the vineyard, convinced that was all my life would be. And then you literally stumbled into my life, beautiful and heartbroken in your wedding dress, and everything changed." Larissa felt tears prick at her eyes, remembering that devastating day that had somehow led to this moment of profound connection. "I'm not asking for answers or commitments right now," Stephen continued. "I know we still have a lot to figure out, but I want you to know that when the dust settles, when we've established a stable situation for both boys, I want to build a life with you, a family, if that's what you want too." The sincerity in his eyes took Larissa's breath away. Despite everything, Xavier's betrayal, Vivian's manipulations, the complexity of their blended family situation, she found herself filled with certainty. "It is what I want," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I want a life with you and Noah, and with James too when he's with us. It won't always be easy, but I think it will always be worth it." Their eyes held across the candlelit table, a silent promise passing between them. They might not know exactly what the future would bring, but they would face it together. The final day of the competition brought the award ceremony, held in the grand ballroom where they had attended the welcome reception. Nervous energy filled the room as vintners awaited the results that could significantly impact their businesses and reputations. Stephen and Larissa sat at a table with several other small vineyard owners, everyone maintaining polite conversation, while clearly distracted by anticipation. When the reserve category was announced, Stephen reached for Larissa's hand under the table, his grip tightening as the judges described what they had been looking for. "And the gold medal for Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon goes to..." The head judge paused for dramatic effect. "Moonlight Vineyard for their 2023 reserve." The room erupted in applause as Stephen sat momentarily frozen in shock. Larissa nudged him, gently, her face splitting in a wide grin. "You won, Stephen, you won!" He rose to accept the award, his normally composed demeanor giving way to genuine joy as he shook the judge's hand and accepted the prestigious medal. From the podium, he thanked his team, the competition organizers, and then his gaze found Larissa. "And finally, I want to thank Larissa Jackson, whose belief in Moonlight Vineyard and in me has made all the difference. This award belongs to you too." The simple but public acknowledgement brought tears to Larissa's eyes. In that moment, all the complications of their situation seemed distant and manageable compared to the bond they shared. Following the ceremony, they were approached by numerous distributors eager to carry the award-winning wine. By the end of the evening, Stephen had signed preliminary agreements that would take Moonlight Vineyard's presence from regional to national, a transformative development for the business. "We should celebrate," Stephen suggested as they finally escaped the crowd of well-wishers and business contacts. "Properly, just the two of us. Their celebration began with champagne on their hotel balcony, overlooking the city lights reflecting on the bay. The night was unusually warm for San Francisco, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the ocean. "To new beginnings," Larissa toasted, echoing Stephen's words from the start of their trip. "And to us," he added, clinking his glass against hers before setting it aside to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as the emotions of the day, triumph, joy, love, found physical expression. Stephen's hands traced the curve of Larissa's waist, sliding up to cup her face as he deepened the kiss. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "So much." Larissa responded by pressing closer, her body molding to his as her fingers threaded through his hair. Words seemed inadequate for what she felt. This combination of desire, gratitude, and bone-deep certainty that she had found where she belonged. They moved inside, leaving a trail of discarded clothing from the balcony to the bed. In the dim, light filtering through the curtains, they took their time exploring each other, celebrating their connection with increasingly urgent caresses. When they finally came together, it was with an intensity that left them both breathless. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment seemed magnified by the significance of the day, by the promises they had made to each other over dinner the night before. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Larissa's head resting on Stephen's chest, she felt a profound contentment wash over her. Here in this man's arms, she had found a love that was both passionate and steady, both exciting and comforting. "I don't want to go back," she admitted softly. "Not yet. These past few days have been perfect." Stephen's hand stroked lazily up and down her bare back. "We could extend our stay," he suggested. "One more day. The harvest can wait that long." Larissa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "After everything we've been dealing with, I think we've earned one more day of peace. One more day of just being us." They called the vineyard manager to make arrangements, then spent their bonus day exploring the city like carefree tourists, riding cable cars, visiting Fisherman's Wharf, sharing sourdough bread and clam chowder while watching sea lions bask in the sun. For those precious hours, they were simply Stephen and Larissa, two people in love, discovering a beautiful city together. But as their extended getaway drew to a close, reality began to intrude on their bubble of happiness. Checking his phone. Before their flight home, Stephen found multiple missed calls from both Kate and Vivian. "Something's wrong," he said, his expression darkening as he listened to his voicemail. "Vivian took James to the emergency room last night. Some kind of allergic reaction." Larissa felt her stomach drop. "Is he okay?" "He's stable now," Stephen replied, visibly relieved. "Apparently he has a shellfish allergy they didn't know about. But Vivian's furious that I wasn't reachable." He ran a hand through his hair, tension returning to his shoulders. "She's threatening to use this in the custody negotiations, claiming I'm unreliable, that I put the vineyard before James's well-being." And just like that, their perfect interlude was over. The real world, with all its complications and responsibilities, was waiting for them at home. But as they boarded their flight back to Moonlight Vineyard, Larissa took comfort in knowing they returned stronger together, their bond reinforced by the days they had shared. Whatever storms awaited them, Vivian's manipulations, the challenges of blending their family, the demands of the upcoming harvest, they would weather them side by side. Their love a shelter in the midst of life's inevitable turbulence. Chapter 9. Autumn Revelations. The harvest season at Moonlight Vineyard brought both bounty and challenges. The award-winning Cabernet had drawn unprecedented attention from buyers and the press, but Vivian's increasingly aggressive tactics in the custody negotiations cast a shadow over what should have been a time of celebration. She's demanding full financial disclosure now, Stephen explained one evening as he and Larissa sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the vineyard in golden hues. Not just my personal accounts, but all the vineyard's books. Her lawyer claims it's necessary to establish appropriate child support. Larissa frowned, recognizing the strategy for what it was, another attempt to gain leverage. She's fishing for information about the expansion plans, isn't she? Stephen nodded grimly. Almost certainly. The national distribution deals we signed in San Francisco would be public knowledge in the industry, but the visitor experience concept, the luxury cottages, those could be extremely profitable. And she wants a piece of it for James. For herself, you mean? Larissa corrected gently. James is just her excuse. Despite Vivian's interference, their relationship had only strengthened since returning from San Francisco. Larissa had all but moved into the main house, dividing her time between graphic design work for the vineyard, helping with the harvest, and building relationships with both Noah and James, who continued to visit on alternate weekends. To Larissa's surprise, she had developed genuine affection for the copper-haired boy who shared so many of Stephen's mannerisms. James was sweet-natured and eager to please, clearly thriving under Stephen's paternal attention. The transition had been remarkably smooth. For the children, it was the adults who struggled with the complex dynamics. I've been thinking, Stephen said suddenly, breaking the silence, about a way to resolve this situation with Vivian once and for all. Larissa turned to him, curious. What kind of solution? A financial settlement? A significant lump sum placed in a trust for James's future, with clear legal guidelines for how it can be used. Education, healthcare, that sort of thing. Not accessible to Vivian directly. Would she accept that? Stephen's jaw tightened with determination. She might, if the alternative is a protracted legal battle she can't afford. Her vineyard is in serious financial trouble. I had Tom look into it discreetly. She's over-leveraged and facing foreclosure if this season's harvest doesn't turn things around. The legal negotiations that followed were exhaustive. Vivian initially rejected the trust proposal outright, demanding instead ongoing payments and a percentage of Moonlight Vineyard's profits. But when Stephen's lawyer presented documented evidence of her financial mismanagement, threatening to request a financial guardian be appointed for James's interests, she reluctantly returned to the negotiating table. After 3 weeks of tense meetings, they reached an agreement. A substantial trust for James's education and future, modest monthly child support payments, and a separate one-time payment to help Vivian stabilize her vineyard's finances in exchange for her signing away any claim to Moonlight Vineyard's assets or future earnings. It's more than fair, Tom Barrett assured them after the final documents were signed. And most importantly, it provides stability for James while protecting your business interests. That evening, Stephen led Larissa through the vineyard as twilight deepened around them, following a path they had walked many times before. But this time, he turned off onto a smaller trail that wound up to a gentle rise overlooking the entirety of Moonlight Vineyard. At the top stood an ancient oak tree, its massive branches spreading protectively over the hillside. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Stephen said, drawing her beneath the tree's canopy. "I used to come here as a boy. When my father first planted these vines, I proposed to Sarah here." His voice softened with memory. "And after she died, I would bring Noah here to look at the stars and tell him stories about his mother." Larissa felt the significance of the moment settling over her. "It's beautiful," she said simply, gazing out at the vineyard spread below them, rows of vines gilded by the last light of day. Stephen turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Larissa, when you came into our lives that day at the church, I thought I was just helping a stranger in need. I had no idea you would become essential to me, to Noah, to everything I care about." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Larissa's breath caught as he knelt before her on one knee. "I know our situation isn't simple," Stephen continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "With James, with Vivian, with all the complications. But my feelings for you are the simplest, truest thing I know." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by small diamonds. "Larissa Jackson, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me and our boys, both of them, here at Moonlight Vineyard?" Tears filled Larissa's eyes as she looked down at this man who had helped her heal from heartbreak, who had shown her what real partnership and love could be. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Stephen. Yes to all of it." As they stood embracing beneath the ancient oak, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Larissa felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in the deepest sense. Their moment of perfect happiness was interrupted by the distant sound of a car engine, headlights cutting through the twilight as a vehicle made its way up the vineyard's main drive. To Larissa's shock, Xavier stepped out, looking much as he had the last time she'd seen him, the day he was supposed to have become her husband. "Larissa," he called, spotting her immediately. "Thank God, I've been looking everywhere for you." Stephen moved protectively to Larissa's side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Can we help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cool. Xavier's gaze darted between them, realization dawning as he noted their close stance, the fresh engagement ring glittering on Larissa's finger. "I see," he said, his voice tight. "I guess I'm too late." "Too late for what, Xavier?" Larissa asked, finding herself remarkably calm in the face of this ghost from her past. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to wonder what might have been if he hadn't betrayed her, the life they'd planned, the children they might have had. But the thought faded quickly, leaving only certainty that this path, however unexpected, was the right one. To explain, to apologize, to ask for another chance. Xavier ran a hand through his hair. "Things with Camilla, it didn't work out. The baby, there was a miscarriage, and I realized what I had thrown away with you. I'm sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. "That must have been painful for both of you." Xavier nodded, seemingly encouraged by her empathy. "It was. It made me realize how much I still love you, Larissa. How much I miss you. I know I hurt you, but we could start fresh. What you did was terrible. But in a strange way, I'm grateful," Larissa replied honestly. "If you hadn't left me at the altar, I would never have found my way to Moonlight Vineyard. I would never have found my true home." Xavier's face fell, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "So that's it? There's no chance?" "There's no chance," Larissa confirmed gently but firmly. "I've moved on, Xavier. I suggest you do the same." As they watched Xavier's car disappear down the long driveway, Stephen pulled Larissa into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked, searching her face with concern. To her own surprise, Larissa found herself smiling. "I'm more than okay. That was closure, I guess. The final chapter of my old life closing, so our new one can truly begin." Chapter A 10, Vintage of Promise. The December morning dawned clear and crisp, frost glistening on the dormant vines that stretched in orderly rows around Moonlight Vineyard. Inside the renovated barrel room, transformed with twinkling lights, evergreen garlands, and white roses, Larissa stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the elegant ivory gown that hugged her curves before flowing gracefully. "To the floor, you look absolutely stunning," Kate said, adjusting the simple veil that crowned Larissa's natural curls. "Stephen is going to be speechless." Larissa smiled, a calm certainty filling her heart. Unlike her previous wedding day, there were no jitters, no doubts, only peaceful anticipation of the future she was choosing. The past 3 months had brought both challenges and triumphs. The car, Financial settlement with Vivian had been finalized after tense negotiations, providing for James's future while establishing clear boundaries. Though Vivian remained a complicated presence in their lives, the arrangement had brought a measure of stability that allowed them all to move forward. Construction had begun on the first luxury cottage, part of Stephen's vision for expanding. Moonlight Vineyard's offerings, Larissa's designs for the interiors, blending rustic charm with modern comfort, had received enthusiastic approval from their investors. Together, they were building not just a family, but a legacy. A soft knock at the door announced Noah and James, both handsome in matching suits, their excitement barely contained as they entered. "Miss Larissa, you look like a princess," Noah exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. "Do you like our suits?" James asked shyly, still sometimes uncertain of his place in this blended family, despite everyone's efforts to make him feel welcome. Larissa knelt carefully, mindful of her dress, to embrace. "Both boys, you two are the most handsome ring-bearers any bride could ask for," she said, straightening James's bow tie and smoothing Noah's cowlick. "Are you ready for your very important job?" They nodded solemnly, the velvet ring pillows clutched in, their small hands a testament to the responsibility they felt. Larissa felt her heart swell with love for these children who had become hers in every way that mattered. "We practiced a lot," Noah assured her. "Daddy said we can't drop the rings, or the whole wedding will be ruined." Larissa laughed. "Your daddy was teasing. Nothing could ruin today. It's perfect already because all the people I love will be there." Another knock heralded her father, distinguished in his tuxedo, eyes misty as he beheld his daughter. "It's on time, sweetheart," he said softly. "Are you ready?" This time, as Larissa took her father's arm to walk down the aisle, there was no fear of abandonment, no doubt about the man waiting for her. Stephen stood tall and handsome at the altar they had created among the wine barrels, his gaze finding hers immediately, filled with such love and certainty that it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with vows they had written themselves. Stephen spoke of second chances and unexpected blessings, of building a family from the broken pieces of their pasts. Larissa promised to nurture not just their love, but the legacy of Moonlight Vineyard, to be mother to both boys, to face whatever challenges came their way together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Stephen's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The small gathering of friends and family erupted in applause, Noah and James cheering loudest of all. The reception that followed was a celebration of not just their marriage, but the successful harvest, with Moonlight Vineyard's award-winning wines flowing freely and tables laden with locally sourced delicacies. As twilight fell, tiny lights illuminated the courtyard, where guests danced under the stars, the perfect blend of elegance and rustic charm that characterized their vineyard. "Happy, Mrs. Amel?" Stephen asked, as they swayed together for their first dance, his arms holding her close. Deliriously, Larissa replied, still getting used to her new name. "Though I think I'm keeping Jackson professionally, Larissa Jackson Amel has a nice ring to it for the design business." Stephen smiled, spinning her gently under the twinkling lights. "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy, though I have to admit, I love hearing you called Mrs. Amel." As the evening progressed, Larissa found a quiet moment to slip away to the porch of the main house, needing a brief respite from the celebration. She stood looking out over the vineyard, now illuminated by a full moon that cast everything in silver light. "Penny for your thoughts," came Stephen's voice as he joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Larissa leaned back against his chest, feeling utterly content. "I was just thinking about that day at the church, when Xavier left, and me, how devastated I was, how certain I was that my life was over." Stephen pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now? Now I understand that it was just beginning. She turned in his arms to face him. Everything led me here, to you, to Noah and James, to this place. Even the painful parts were necessary to bring me where I belong. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the boys were asleep in Kate's care, Stephen carried Larissa over the threshold of the newly completed luxury cottage, their private retreat for the night before leaving for their honeymoon. In Napa Valley, the interior was exactly as Larissa had designed it, with a stunning view of the vineyard from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a stone fireplace already lit and casting warm light across the sumptuous bed strewn with rose petals. "Welcome home, Mrs. Amell," Stephen murmured, setting her gently on her feet but keeping her close in the circle of his arms. "It's perfect," Larissa breathed, taking in the space that represented both their personal happiness and the future of Moonlight Vineyard. Their lovemaking that night was unhurried and deeply intimate, a celebration of the commitment they had made and the future they would build together. As they lay tangled in the sheets afterward, the moonlight casting silver patterns across their skin, Larissa felt a sense of completion she had never thought possible. "We should probably get some sleep," Stephen said eventually, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Early flight tomorrow." But Larissa wasn't quite ready for the day to end. "Tell me a story first," she requested, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Tell me about the next vintage, about what our life will be like a year from now." Stephen smiled, pulling her closer. "Well, by this time next year, the visitor cottages will be fully operational. Your design studio on the property will be handling projects from all over wine country. Noah will be in first grade, and James will be spending more time here as our custody arrangement settles into its rhythm." His voice grew softer, more intimate. "And maybe, if we're blessed, there will be another little Amell on the way. A sister for the boys, perhaps." Larissa's heart skipped at the thought. A daughter with Stephen's eyes or her dark curls, a child born of their love rather than previous relationships. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." "We have time," Stephen assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "A lifetime to grow our family, to build our business, to create our story together." As sleep finally claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms with the vineyard stretching out beneath the winter moon, Larissa knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. From the heartbreak of being left at the altar to the joy of finding a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined, her journey had been one of transformation and rebirth. Like the finest wine Moonlight Vineyard produced, her life with Stephen had emerged from a perfect storm of circumstances, some bitter, some sweet, to create something complex, balanced, and ultimately beautiful. A vintage of promise, created from the most unexpected beginnings, but destined to grow richer and more profound with each passing year.